Do we ignore the crime and the atrocities which have been committed and just say, well, you're a patient? Or do we say, no, you're a prisoner who has a mental problem?
Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum, or Broadmoor Hospital, as it's better known today, is Britain's oldest high-security psychiatric hospital. Over the last 162 years, it's housed some of Britain's most dangerous criminals, from Peter Sutcliffe and Charles Bronson to Ronnie Kray and Robert Napper. Alongside its high-profile patients, Broadmoor also attracted attention from celebrities who came to visit. Some even stayed, most notably Jimmy Savile.
Jimmy Savile said to me the one thing he wanted was a knighthood. He said, I don't care about anything else. He said, I want my knighthood.
This is Matt from Underworld Uncut. This time, we're with former facilities manager Trevor Smith, who worked inside Broadmoor for 34 years. I filmed with him in 2013. I was particularly interested in hearing about some of the high-profile patients he encountered during his time at Broadmoor.
Where do you want me to start? There are so many. Kay was troublesome. Napper has been very quiet. Peter Sutcliffe, I would deem him as scruffy and unshaven. A very quiet, laid-back character. Very pleasant to talk to. But in the back of your mind all the time is you think, oh, I don't know. You try to keep a distance from what they are saying and what they want to do. But Sutcliffe became a beast, gave himself up really as far as clothing and one thing and another, and certainly grew the beard because he didn't want to shave.
Ronnie Kray was undoubtedly one of Broadmoor's most infamous residents. I wanted to know what Trevor remembered about him and what it was like to come face to face with such a notorious figure.
Bully, insofar as that he wanted to control and insist on wearing his silk shirts and one thing or another. One of the things that come out from psychopaths is they are unbelievably tidy, hygiene-wise, and their clothing, they fold everything. It has to be dead right. And he was one of them.
Working at Broadmoor meant being part of an environment where some patients had committed horrific crimes. I wanted to understand how Trevor balanced the human side of the people inside with the knowledge of what they'd done.
It is difficult, but I have to be honest. You have to divorce from that because you're not there to judge. There, you're not there to, and this is instilled in you. You're not here to judge these people. You're here to care for them. It becomes very difficult because Broadmoor started to take in paedophiles, and I think that had a bigger ring to it than anyone who'd committed murder or whatever, because it's too near home, so to speak. They were dealt with on respect, but in the back of your mind, you were more conscious of the paedophiles than you were the other patients in there. Bearing in mind that some patients in there, of course, haven't committed anything. They're there for their own safety. We then had people on drugs who were sent to Broadmoor. So they're not all in that mould of evil, nasty people. There are those who genuinely do need help.
Jimmy Savile first made contact with Broadmoor Hospital in 1968, and soon after became their honorary entertainments officer. In 2011, an ITV documentary exposed Savile's decades-long history of child sexual abuse. I wanted to know what Trevor thought at the time about Savile being given keys to Broadmoor.
We argued against it. Because no one gets keys in Broadmoor until you've done a minimum of 2 weeks training at the school. And you go through all the security, different several. No one. They gave him keys because he'd moved into the political area with Thatcher and going to Checkers and and all of that. And he used that. We argued against why has he got a cottage in Broadmoor, which is there, you can see it. Why has he got it? And when the cottages were knocked down, they gave him a flat. Why? You know, what is it all about? Because he did, as the years went past, he did less and less and less and less at Broadmoor. Politics were involved with Savile, and I mean, when he used to go onto the female side, I mean, you know, he's a psychopathic idiot, you know, and people didn't say anything, although I said for years, my daughter, I've said for years about Savile because of the way he used to kiss girls after the marathon and things like that, you know, and he used to swap his autograph for a kiss. And he had this technique. What he used to do was when he grotesquely kissed these young girls, his cop-out was, "Oh my goodness gracious, mate." You know how we used to go? He used to go, "Oh my goodness gracious, mate." And people used to laugh. Because that's how he came over. And that's how we got away with it. Because it was always, "Oh my goodness gracious," and that was how he got over it. But his time in Broadmoor was as much youth. He was utterly useless, what he did at Broadmoor. Jimmy Savile said to me, the one thing he wanted was a knighthood. Because he said, he said it to me, "How will it look? Pit boy becomes a knight." And that was his aim, to get the knighthood.
In the 1970s, Broadmoor employed approximately 800 staff members, requiring a distinct mix of medical, security, maintenance and administration.
Most of the staff in Broadmoor at that time, he came from the army. I didn't come from the army, but I joined them and loved it. One of the things that was really good there was the camaraderie that you had. And I think this stemmed from the fact that those who come from the army were used to the camaraderie, and that infiltrated right the way through. And it was very, very, very good, but you needed it. You needed it there because of the environment that was in there. So, but it was good.
If you're enjoying the film so far, becoming a channel member is a great way to support the work we do here at Underworld Uncut. Starting a new job is nerve-wracking for anyone, but beginning your career behind the walls of Broadmoor is something few people will ever experience.
When I first got there, I was petrified. I was petrified because the very first thing they did with me, I was on Norfolk One, which was top security then, and they said, "We'd like to introduce you to somebody." And they opened the door, and sitting on the floor was a patient called John Silver, who's now at Rampton, so he's been there many years. And when he stood up, he must be 6'7". In fact, he looked absolutely identical to the rest of a giant haystack. And I just literally froze on the spot. And I turned around, and I can tell you, my legs were like lead. That was my first introduction, really, to Broadmoor. And, but there again, you see, when I found out about John's index, it was very, very sad. And I quite liked him. I tell you, I was good friends of John Silver, Jimmy Savile. Very good friends with him. Always used to want to come and talk to him.
I was interested in what Broadmoor Hospital was really like when Trevor first started, back in 1974.
Broadmoor was like a village inside, huge. And it was all these Victorian, beautiful buildings. You see, Broadmoor, in those days, was virtually self-sufficient. You know, that was staff and patients, which it reflected, because, I mean, bearing in mind that you had your shops in Broadmoor, you had a wonderful club at Broadmoor for the staff, and you had a school at Broadmoor. So everything was contained. It was almost a community unto itself. And this did spin off onto the patients, because we were able to communicate much easier than certainly today.
Broadmoor in the 1970s was a very different place from the institution we know today. I wanted to understand what everyday life was like behind those walls. Not the headlines, but the reality of working there day after day.
A typical day would be you would start at 7 o'clock in the morning. The handover would take place from night shift. You would then go through the day, and patients would go to the occupational therapy units, which was, in fact, very, very good, because they did all imaginable things: leather, they had a tailor shop, they had bricklaying, they even made garden slabs and so forth. And then they would work till 12 o'clock. They would then come back to the wards, where they would then have their lunch, and then the afternoon they would do the normal things, watching television or so forth. Staff would go off, people would go off at 3 o'clock, and the afternoon staff would come on, and so it would go on. We had wonderful artists there. We had wonderful chap who we used to have to take from the forest a root or a tree stump, and he would carve that into the most magnificent sculpture. So they were fully occupied in whatever carpentry. They could do really what they liked, as far as that goes. But there was very, very strong talent there. And this was exposed then, but it's not now.
For decades, Broadmoor has been surrounded by mystery and public fascination. Often described as a prison, but officially a hospital. I wanted to understand how Trevor viewed it from the inside.
To me, Broadmoor is a prison, and they give medication, or they solve the medical or psychiatric problems and so forth. Because, I mean, you've got schizophrenia and you've got psychopaths and so forth. How do you deal with those? Well, we deal with them like this way. But you cannot ignore the fact as to why they're there. You can't turn around and say, well, yeah, but I know he's killed 5 people, but he didn't mean to, because he's, that is not good enough. You have to let the public see that, yes, we know who he is, we know what he's done, right? But on the basis he will be treated as a prisoner, but we will treat him medically. But they don't do that. It's regarded as a hospital. And people start to think that they are poor people because of that. No, it's not true. Because you can't just ignore at whim the atrocities that have taken place. You have to. I mean, some are genuinely in need of help, and it will forever be an issue until they establish what really is Broadmoor. Is it run by the Home Office, or is it run by the National Health Service?
Trevor spent 34 years working at Broadmoor, a period that saw huge changes, both inside the hospital and in the way society viewed secure mental health care.
When politicians became more and more involved in the running of the various establishments, and Broadmoor suffers, and has done for a number of years, of that grave illness, which I've always said about, and that illness is, it becomes a gravy train, and when that happens, those people in authority are more concerned with what they get from it rather than what they give to it. Directors and senior managers, I mean, they have no input really, and it's a wash with them, but they have no direct input to the patient. It is the frontline staff, which they've started making redundancies and reducing it down, and they've cancelled overtime. They are the people who know Broadmoor better than anyone. But the NHS has allowed, not only Broadmoor, I mean other hospitals like it, where it's become so top-heavy. I tell you, in the 70s and 80s, we had 3 social workers in Broadmoor, 3. Now there's something like 38. In the early 70s, we had 800 patients. Now there's only 211. So, very rarely, the numbers of people in these high-salaried professional positions far outweigh the need, because the people who you need there are those on a daily basis who give the medication, care for them, make sure they eat, make sure they're clean. That is the work that patients appreciate, because they don't appreciate the fact that you've got, loads and loads of people in admin departments typing away and all that. They're not interested in that. They're interested in their own well-being and how am I going to get better and move out of here. And the only people who can give them that are those on the front line every day. So it went wrong. Then they did away with all the occupational therapy units. Did away with all of them. And patients had a right to do what they wanted on the ward. They could sit about, lay about, do what they like. But it did nothing in the later years to secure those patients going out to the outside world, because all that had long gone. And so Broadmoor is worse today, operationally, than it was years ago.
One of the biggest questions surrounding Broadmoor has always been the balance between security and care.
It's very difficult to analyse around the tops of the walls, the razor wire, and then you've got one wall, and then you've got another wall inside that wall. And Henry Tilling, who said the security had to be upgraded with cameras everywhere and lights everywhere and so forth and one thing and another. That's a facade, you see, because you have to say, well, what treatment do you get? And how many doctors have you got that deals with your mental problem on a daily basis? And what medication necessitates you for it to be called a hospital? Or do we ignore the crime and the atrocities which have been committed and just say, well, you're a patient? Or do we say, no, you're a prisoner who has a mental problem? Now, years ago, it would be deemed that you were a prisoner with a mental problem. Now, it's you're a patient. And it's very difficult to find that balance because, you see, under the NHS, we look around and we say, oh, there's a hospital. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Of course, hospitals don't have cells. Hospitals don't, well, years ago, you used to slop out. You didn't do that. You didn't have a strict regime as Broadmoor had years ago. So therefore, where it went wrong was because it was categorised as a hospital when, in theory, it isn't. It has to be seen as to what it is.
After more than 3 decades at Broadmoor, Trevor had seen moments of challenge, change and progress. I wanted to know what moment from his career meant the most to him.
That was when I got the lower staff recognised for the very important job they did, which was the domestic catering staff and so forth, who at the time was insignificant. And they became significant because they did a very good job, and we got their pay structure brought up to a level which was justified, which for years they hadn't done, and the fact that the domestic staff in particular who worked on the wards with the same danger, perhaps more, because they had weapons they were using, and yet they were not recognised as being working in that environment. They are now. And I think if you spoke to the Broadmoor and my staff who was at Broadmoor, they would tell you that we achieved an awful lot by doing that, by getting staff recognised and helping the nursing staff to get a reasonable wage. And I argued many times, how can you justify the role of a staff nurse, for example, in Broadmoor with a staff nurse at Frimley Park General Hospital? Because that's what the agenda for change does. But you see, a nurse in the General Hospital, or a staff nurse in the General Hospital, is more qualified in the medical sense, because the staff nurse at Broadmoor is psychiatric. But having said that, the staff nurse at Frimley Park doesn't expect to go in and get her head thumped and kicked in, whereas the staff nurse in Broadmoor does, and it happens. So I could never see this level playing field. You know, there has to be an issue where those who's working in a very dangerous environment, it must be recognised. But many of my colleagues, some of them are now dead, retired, had to retire early because of their injuries. And it's never recognised. Yeah, it's never ever recognised that these people have gone into work and been seriously injured and they've had to retire. Some, 2 or 3 I know, who ended up with mental problems, serious mental problems, and had to retire from work because of that. So, you know, it's finding that balance, which they don't seem to be able to do, or they don't want to. It's as simple as that. But Broadmoor today is suffering. It's suffering because they won't recognise how many frontline staff they need.
Broadmoor has continued to evolve long after Trevor left. I wanted to hear his thoughts on the hospital today.
Broadmoor has been the most fantastic buildings, beautifully built, wonderfully designed and one thing or another, but they've knocked them down, they've gone. Broadmoor, as we knew, has long gone. Broadmoor, as it was intended, died years ago. It died when politicians became involved, people who didn't really know what they were doing become involved, and had they left it to the people who knew, then Broadmoor would be a huge success today. Sadly, I think it's a failure.
Thanks for watching this video with Trevor Smith about the high security psychiatric hospital, Broadmoor. For more stories from Britain's underworld, from gangland killings to drug busts, make sure to like, hype and subscribe. We've also recently launched memberships for anyone who'd like to support the channel and help us keep creating content. More information is in the description below. This is Matt from Underworld Uncut. See you on the next one.